Scary stories and monster tales have a way of thrilling us. They suspend our disbelief and give us a physical reaction that, for many, can ride the line between truly frightening and pleasurable. The characters in these stories can take on many forms, some stemming from the human world and others from the supernatural. A writer of a good horror story knows how to seamlessly suspend the reader's perception of disbelief, to make the fictional characters feel so real that they may feel a chill that lingers long beyond when the story has finished. I remember the first time I ever read a scary story. I was in elementary school in the early 2000s, and I remember a popular series of books that you could check out from the school library. They were called Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and they were written by Alvin Schwartz. The books featured illustrations by an artist named Stephen Gammell. While the stories were chilling, it was the illustrations that really stand out in my mind and made the details of the story hold a firm place in my mind. Each of the drawings were in black and white, and though sometimes on the covers of the books, red or blue would be incorporated into the designs, it was the way that he drew blood that was almost stringy, like a spider web, and even though these illustrations were in black and white, you could tell exactly what he was depicting. I remember one illustration specifically, and I can't really even remember the details of the story that accompanied it, but the illustration is still very vivid even 20 years later. In this illustration was a woman, and she looked skeletal, her mouth partially agape, with stringy hair that looked like tangled black threads, and she had black holes for eyes. I was probably a fourth grader when I read this story and first saw this illustration that accompanied it, which would make me about 9 or 10 years old. And I remember thinking about the woman in that illustration long after I'd closed the book, when I was lying in my purple-painted bedroom underneath a comforter covered in flowers and surrounded by my stuffed animals. I would worry that this gaunt, eerie-looking woman with black, empty eye sockets would come out of the shadows to haunt me. But even that didn't stop me from continuing to seek out these stories, or from leaving a trip to Barnes & Noble with the Scary Stories Treasury, all bound 3 books into one volume. I remember being really popular at recess when I would bring that book along with me to school. But when I was reading Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, this would have been around 2005 or 2006. Today, stories of a similar vein can be found all over the internet, and they're spread widely throughout meme culture at a much faster rate than the Scary Stories books would circulate to nearly every student through our small Midwestern elementary school's library. We would read these stories, and they would feel real in the moment, but it was relatively easy, once the adrenaline rush began to wear off, to remind yourself that it was just a story. The characters in the illustrations weren't really real, and after all, the book had been checked out from the fiction section of the library rather than the nonfiction section, so it wasn't real. But there was something about the way that those stories can be found on the internet that is different from what I read as a child. A lot of these stories are more commonly referred to as creepypastas, a play on the words copy and paste, as their most common means of transmission is to be copied and pasted from site to site, with some minor edits and some changes along the way. Think of a digital version of retelling ghost stories around a campfire. Some of these stories are accompanied by photoshopped images, rather than illustrations from the books I read as a kid. And looking at these images, especially when thinking about how a child would look at these images, they can look very real. The story we're going to tell in today's episode of Law and Disorder is far from fiction. It's often referred to as the Slenderman murder, but in truth, it was only an attempted murder that occurred. The case and the story around it bring up very key topics of conversation that include adolescent mental health, the moral and societal dilemmas of charging juveniles in an adult system, and even the susceptibility of impressionable young minds to what they read on the internet.
You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Law and Disorder, where we dive into the world of true crime stories with memorable cases that have lasting effects for law enforcement.
2 12-year-old girls, Anissa Weier and Morgan Geiser, were fascinated by a creepypasta character. This fascination quickly escalated to the point of delusion, and it led to one of the most brutal acts of violence to occur in their sleepy Midwestern home of Waukesha, Wisconsin, where, on average, less than 1 murder occurs per year. In 2014, Anissa and Morgan spent months planning to kill their friend, a fellow 12-year-old named Bella Leutner, and at the time, she was called Bella as a nod to her middle name. They wanted to kill her to appease the fictional character of Slenderman, a tall, faceless, supernatural creature that is the subject of many popular creepypasta stories. Luckily, Anissa and Morgan were unsuccessful in murdering Bella. However, they came very close. Bella was stabbed 19 times, and one injury near her heart was only a millimeter away from becoming fatal. In the state of Wisconsin, a notoriously tough-on-crime state, murder or attempted murder by a juvenile is immediately sent to the adult criminal justice system, rather than the juvenile one, which means that Anissa and Morgan did not qualify for certain therapeutic services that would have been helpful to them in their case. In today's episode, we'll talk about a few key things. First, we want to discuss the events that led up to Anissa and Morgan's crime and the crime itself. Second, we'll talk about what it looks like, at least in the state of Wisconsin, when a juvenile is being tried as an adult. And third, we'll talk a little bit about the biggest themes that emerge out of the case, the susceptibility of a child's mind to what they find on the internet. This will kind of be discussed as we talk about that first topic, the crime and what led up to the crime, as they're very, very closely intertwined. And this impact that mental illness can have to this susceptibility. To tell this story truly, we need to start at the beginning, when the victim of this crime, Bella Leutner, met Morgan Geiser, a seemingly harmless girl that would one day become her attacker. Peyton Isabella, or Bella Leutner, and Morgan Geiser became friends when they were in the 4th grade, and to many of their classmates, their friendship was surprising. While the two girls were the same age, in many ways they were complete opposites. Bella wore rainbows, butterfly wings, and lots of glitter, while Morgan often wore black and donned sneakers with skulls printed on them. Morgan read books about serial killers and other scary stories for fun, and Bella was one to classify scary stories as mean. But despite these differences, they had a lot of similar interests. Both loved Harry Potter, playing with American Girl dolls and Barbies, and they loved their pets, specifically guinea pigs and cats, and they shared the same favorite color of purple. But it was apparent that these two girls experienced their devotion for their interests with varying degrees of intensity. A great example is their passion for cats. Bella channeled that energy into volunteering at a local animal shelter, caring for the sweet little kittens who were looking for their forever homes, excitedly carrying 2 kittens at a time, one slung over each of her shoulders. Morgan, on the other hand, wanted to be a cat. She pictured herself with long fangs and claws, fluffy triangular ears on the top of her head. She saw herself as one of the lost kittens that Bella so tenderly cared for. And Bella was, quite literally, Morgan's only friend. Morgan was classified by her peers, her teachers, and even her parents as a bit of an outcast. To Morgan's parents, Angie and Matt, the fact that Morgan was going through life with little care to what her peers thought of her was brave and even admirable, especially as she grew closer to her teenage years, which, for girls and boys alike, are typically plagued with the incessant need to fit in. Beyond the interests that Morgan shared with Bella, she had other interests too. She loved Star Trek and often saw the world through the lens of logic, similar to that of her favorite character in the series, Dr. Spock. And Morgan had a number of imaginary friends that she would often speak to aloud. Some of these imaginary friends were actual characters from the books and pop culture that stemmed from Morgan's interest. For instance, one was Voldemort, the fictional antagonist of the Harry Potter series. But some of the others were completely fictional, born of Morgan's own mind. Each imaginary friend had a distinct appearance and personality, and Morgan shared all of these imaginary friends with Bella, and Bella even pretended that she could also see them. She conversed with them alongside with Morgan, and even though she couldn't see them in the way that Morgan could, Morgan shared all of these imaginary friends with Bella, and Bella even pretended that she could also see them. She conversed with them alongside Morgan, even though she couldn't see them in the way that Morgan could. When Morgan told her she was hearing voices in her head, Bella pretended to hear them too. And over the next 3 years of their friendship, Bella would take on the role of a social caregiver for Morgan, and often acted as her conscience. When Morgan found a mysterious pill in the girls' bathroom at their elementary school and threatened to eat it, Bella threw it in the trash. Bella invited Morgan to her birthday parties, and they would watch Star Trek episodes with her on the weekends. They trick-or-treated together when Morgan dressed as Dr. Spock for Halloween. And when other students whispered about the two of them, the girls laughed together instead. But as they grew older, Bella was developing more socially than Morgan was. Bella was described by her teachers and peers as being an advocate for herself and others, and she was considered to be nice, sweet, and more normal, whereas Morgan was not described that way. She seemed to become more and more isolated as she got older, and she was often described as very quiet and increasingly withdrawn. It was observed by her teachers that when Morgan would be called upon in class, many of the other students would roll their eyes at her, or they would not want to partner up with her during group projects. Jokes were made by fellow students about her, quote, weirdness being contagious when teachers weren't looking. At one point in 5th grade, a more popular group of girls had propositioned Bella, "You can be in our group if you stop being friends with Morgan." But Bella refused. She chose Morgan. At one point, Bella had written a contract with herself in her journal, promising to be best friends with Morgan forever. Ultimately, this contract would become null and void when Bella was ultimately attacked, but until that point, the plan was to be friends with Morgan for life. Bella knew that beyond her, Morgan didn't have anyone, and she took pride in knowing that she was someone important in her friend's life. However, Bella's mother had reservations about Morgan. She felt that Morgan could be a bad influence on Bella, and encouraged Bella to make some different friends at school. But it was fairly apparent to many other students at school that Morgan's behavior could be considered, quote, scary or disturbing, and that was fairly apparent by her lack of friendships with her peers. She listened to horror-influenced pop-punk songs that were about the devil and enjoyed watching movies like Edward Scissorhands on repeat. But before the crime occurred, and subsequently after the crime, Morgan was not a violent child. However, she was troubled in ways that she really couldn't put into words. Remember those imaginary friends that I mentioned earlier? How Morgan's imaginary friends and voices in her head were different than those formed of childhood innocence? Well, schizophrenia is not something that's typically diagnosed in children. In fact, for many who have a schizophrenia diagnosis, symptoms of the disorder do not even begin to present themselves in a way that would be useful for diagnosis until they're far closer to adulthood. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, it is typically diagnosed between the ages of 16 and 30, typically after the patient experiences an episode of psychosis. It is nearly impossible to diagnose in children, as many of the symptoms can be mistaken for an overactive imagination, hearing voices, seeing hallucinations that for many children are mistaken for imaginary friends, and visualizing colors and patterns. But traumatic events can expedite the presentation of these symptoms, typically because they will trigger an episode of psychosis. Unbeknownst to Morgan, her father had suffered from schizophrenia, and in October of 2014, Morgan would be diagnosed with it as well. But prior to the case, no one knew that Morgan was schizophrenic, but it is important to bring it up early in this story to make a little bit more sense of what happens within the case. In the fall of 2013, Morgan and Bella were 6th graders, which meant they had moved from elementary school and would now be attending Horning Middle School, and Morgan was beginning to sense her difference from her peers. She began to feel anxious over her friendship with Bella, knowing that Bella's mother was not keen on their friendship. And she was also beginning to feel more anxious about her imaginary friends. The things they were telling her were becoming darker and darker, and she began to think more about death. And where she would usually ask these hard questions about life to Bella, she was afraid to scare her. Morgan was afraid Bella would leave her behind, but soon it was becoming less of a problem. Once school started, a new friend began to appear in Morgan's world. Her name was Anissa Weier. Anissa lived in the same condominium complex as Morgan and her family, and she rode the same school bus with Morgan once they began attending Horning Middle School. While Bella and Morgan were becoming friends, Anissa was living a rather tumultuous life at home. When she was 10 years old, her parents, Bill and Christy, announced that they were getting a divorce, but then they continued to live in the same condominium with Anissa for 12 months. Later, Anissa would describe this time as, quote, the worst period of her life. Simultaneously, her half-brother and sister, children from her father's first marriage, were struggling with the fact that their mother was terminally ill and she was dying. It felt as if there was an emotional crisis all around Anissa at all times, but in spite of that, she was doing well in school, so her father did not think much of it. But as her home life became more stressful, extracurricular activities began to drop off her schedule, and she found herself spending more and more time online. She enjoyed playing Minecraft, a popular online video game where you can break apart rocks and trees to build tools, houses, and ultimately your own little worlds. part of playing Minecraft for many children Anissa's age included watching YouTube videos of other players playing the game. And one day, while watching these videos, an ad popped up for creepypasta.com. The ad sparked Anissa's interest, and she logged into the website to check it out. It turned out that creepypasta.com was a website where people would post short stories, usually no longer than 500 words, so that other users could read them and rate them. These stories were free to post and circulate around the internet, and many focused on the same characters that were often created on horror story forums and various blogs, and as well as paranormal Photoshop contests. Anissa would often click the random story button, and it could keep her entertained for hours. She found the stories thrilling. And when Morgan and Anissa met each other on the bus in the fall of 2013, their friendship started with Anissa jokingly punching Morgan on the arm. Anissa was known for being more aggressive, and this was captivating for Morgan. Over time, they realized that they shared a lot of interests. Similar to Bella, Anissa also liked the Harry Potter books, but she liked other things that Morgan was interested in that Bella wasn't, like horror stories and urban legends. Similar to Morgan, Anissa could have also been considered an outsider by her classmates. She and Morgan were able to bond over that and cultivate a close friendship. At one point, Anissa would even begin to think of Morgan as more of a sister than a friend. Morgan introduced Bella to Anissa, and Morgan would categorize Anissa as the leader of their new friend group. But Bella didn't really like Anissa very much. She thought she was very rude and observed that she liked to often hit people and use bad words, which made her uncomfortable. Sensing Bella's dislike, Anissa began to bully Bella at school, and Morgan would act as kind of a mediator between the two girls. In an interview relating to the case, Bella recalled a particular incident where Anissa had thrown her backpack at Bella, ordering her to hold it. In response, Morgan pulled the backpack off of Anissa's lap and held it for her quietly. In her book, Slenderman, Online Obsession, Mental Illness, and the Violent Crime of Two Midwestern Girls, author Kristen Hale describes Morgan's response to the incident as, quote, a silent motion of support meant to convey to Bella that she was sorry Anissa had thrown her backpack, and it made Morgan very sad. And further, she discusses that rather than leaving Bella feeling comforted, the response felt eerie. Bella was used to Morgan taking control in their friendship, often taking the lead when they played games, but around Anissa, she noticed Morgan was more submissive. Anissa was the one to introduce Morgan to creepypasta, and then Morgan introduced Bella to them as well. Bella was less interested in them than the other two girls, and just like she had watched Star Trek with Morgan because she knew Morgan liked it, she did read the creepypasta stories with them, but she really wasn't interested. To her, this new fascination of Morgan's felt scary and very different from her other interests in the past. There were a multitude of different characters that were featured on the site, but once Morgan came across Slenderman, a story filed away on the site under Beings and Entities, Morgan found herself captivated, and she latched on. The character of Slenderman first appeared online in 2009 as part of a paranormal Photoshop contest on the Something Awful forum by a user with the screen name Victor Surge. The creator's true name was Eric Knudsen. And the images that were submitted in the forum are both black and white images of children with an eerie figure in the background. The figure is very tall, with long limbs and an indistinguishable face. The images were posted with cryptic captions, one reading, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead." A common thread in the Slenderman stories is that his victims are young children. Some claim that it is to protect their innocence. In discussion about the characterization of Slenderman, which has been greatly discussed in the outcome of this case, the Slenderman's character is often compared to that of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, who, in the book written by Robert Browning in 1842, first led the rats out of the town of Hamelin by playing a tune on his pipe, and when the townspeople refused to pay him for his services, he played his pipe again a second time, but this time all the children of the town followed him to what is presumed to be their death. Legends around Slenderman say, if he sees you, he will kill you. And if you are thinking about him, he's already seen you and you are his next victim. If you are an impressionable 12-year-old and you saw stories with these statements and then looked at those initial posts from Victor Surge without the context of Slenderman as a character that we have today, I understand how easily one could wrap themselves into the narrative of Slenderman and believe that it is real. But Slenderman caught Morgan's attention for more of a reason than just the fact that these stories about him were creepy, entertaining, and the images looked pretty real. For Morgan, Slenderman was very real, a symptom of her future schizophrenia diagnosis. A relatively common hallucination for Morgan was a tall, faceless demon type of figure that would appear to her, and when she came across Slenderman on creepypasta.com, she recognized it, and it felt validating. Finally, she could identify this being that kept appearing to her, and because of this, in her mind, the stories on creepypasta became more of an encyclopedia of fact, more than a source of fictional entertainment, as it had been for Anissa. Once Morgan latched onto Slenderman, Anissa did too. Morgan's parents knew of her newfound interest in Slenderman, but just chalked it up as another fascination of hers. Morgan had never confided in them that she often saw the hallucination of Slenderman in her room at night, or any hallucination at all, for that matter. But Morgan did not tell Anissa about the hallucinations or voices. But she had told Bella about them years ago. She feared that Anissa wouldn't want to be her friend if she told her about them. So while Anissa knew that Morgan was fascinated by Slenderman, at this time she did not know that Morgan thought she had actually been seeing him for years, and this had compounded her interest. But according to Dr. Shira Chess, an associate professor of media and entertainment studies at the University of Georgia's Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication, the period of time between 2013 and 2014 when Morgan and Anissa would have come across the story of Slenderman was kind of a peak time for the character in media and pop culture. Mythology around the character was spreading at a rate that was faster than ever, and she is quoted in Kristen Hale's book, saying, "The idea became very crowdsourced, and everyone loved it. They all started jumping in. People were making new images, new photos. The first Slender video game came out. The facelessness of the character makes him indefinitely interpretable. There were a lot of different versions out there, and the girls found a version that complemented the things that they wanted to believe." But outside of Morgan's hallucination making Slenderman feel, quote, real to her, Anissa had her own reasons for believing that Slenderman was real. Her reasoning was twofold, and eventually came out as part of the case. Her first reason had to do with a different creepypasta character that was featured on the website, known as Jeff the Killer. According to creepypasta.com, Jeff the Killer's real name was Jeffrey Woods, and when Anissa searched the internet for information, she found news articles from real newspapers about a mentally disabled felon who did exist named Jeffrey Wood. This real Jeff Wood had been convicted in 1998 of armed robbery and the murder of a gas station attendant. While the real Jeffrey Wood lacked the Joker-esque scarred smile of the creepypasta character Jeff the Killer, and he was not a serial murderer like the character, this was proof enough to Anissa that Jeff the Killer was real. From that, she was able to justify her belief that the rest of the creepypasta characters were also real. The second piece of evidence in Anissa's mind were the black and white photos that were created in 2009 by Victor Surge that I mentioned earlier. Anissa conveniently ignored the word Photoshop in the discourse about the images, and rather saw these photos as found artifacts. The photo that really had Anissa convinced that Slenderman was real was a photo of children that were on a hiking trail, and the long, shadowy figure of Slenderman was lurking in the background, camouflaged by trees. When she inspected this photo more thoroughly, she noticed what she believed to be a resemblance between one of the children pictured in the foreground of the photo, a boy with a page boy haircut, who she believed that she looked like. She believed they had the same haircut, similar dark eyes, and a similarly shaped face. For some reason, this self-actualized resemblance to the boy in the photo strengthened her certainty that Slenderman was real. Court records would document that Anissa and Morgan's fascination with Slenderman and creepypastas in general began innocently. The girls would read stories and discuss them on the bus in the morning. Morgan was often drawing pictures of Slenderman or characters that she created as parodies of Slenderman. For example, one of these was Slenderman, and he was dressed in a flamboyant suit and top hat with clown makeup. Morgan even submitted her own original stories to creepypasta.com. One was an origin story for Jeff the Killer, where she suggested he had been bullied as a child. Anissa was thrilled to have a friend that shared her love for creepypastas, especially after years of feeling alienated by her peers for her interests. Having a friend like Morgan who enjoyed these stories made her feel, quote, sane after years of her classmates telling her she was crazy. Their creepypasta book club that she and Morgan had on the bus felt exciting, and she would leave scared, but in a good way, attributing the feeling to being like that of being on a roller coaster. But during their book club is where the two first began to analyze the stories for deeper meaning. From stories they read, they discerned that Slenderman lived in a mansion. The websites they perused often referred to it as Slender Mansion, and it was located in the forest. The girls knew that Wisconsin had forests. One such forest was the Nicollet National Forest that was about 300 miles away from Waukesha. Slenderman haunted children, and sometimes he did it himself. Hunted, oh my god. Slenderman hunted children. Sometimes he did it himself, reaching his long arms through locked doors and windows and snatching children from their homes. Sometimes he would hypnotize parents into killing their children, or he would enlist other creepypastas to do his bidding for him as proxies. Anissa and Morgan began to wonder if they were in danger. Morgan had tried to introduce Bella to the same creepypastas that she was reading with Anissa, but Bella really was not interested at all. She would sit at the computer with Morgan and read the same stories, see the same images and videos, but she did not see how her friend could perceive them as real. The part of Bella that loved Morgan and wanted to remain a loyal, lifelong friend to her wanted to believe Morgan and be able to support her interest. But the other part of her, the part that was scared by Morgan's newfound interest, the part that was ravaged by nightmares due to the stories that Morgan was showing her, felt angry with her. This game of pretending to hear the voices that Morgan described and see her, quote, imaginary friends was starting to get old, and their friendship was beginning to unravel. This made Morgan feel betrayed, and she leaned further into her friendship with Anissa, finally confiding in her to the fact that she heard voices and had been seeing Slenderman as a hallucination. Morgan's admission about the voices and visions increased her credibility in Anissa's eyes, and it further built on their shared delusion that Slenderman was real. But Morgan struggled to trust Anissa. When she would say that she saw Slenderman and Anissa would agree, she was worried that Anissa was lying to her like Bella had been. Eventually, Anissa began to believe that since Morgan could see Slenderman, it meant that she was already a proxy of Slenderman. I've mentioned this term proxy before, but never defined it and what it means in the context of this creepypasta. In this context, a proxy is someone who Slenderman can control and convince to kill at his will. Anissa felt that if Morgan was a proxy, she wanted to be one too, as Morgan was her closest friend. They knew Slenderman was evil, and Morgan was easily distracted. And if she was called upon by Slenderman to commit a murder, Anissa was worried that Morgan would get distracted and not be able to go through with it. And according to their logic from the creepypasta they had read, if Morgan didn't go through with it, Slenderman would kill her instead. So it would be best if they would be able to work as a team. But in order to become a proxy, you had to kill someone. And this is where Anissa and Morgan's crime began. In interviews with police and court testimony, both girls will claim that it is the other who first suggested that they kill someone in order to become proxies for Slenderman. But regardless of who actually came up with the idea, the plot to kill someone for Slenderman began around Christmas of 2013, and the victim was always intended to be Bella Leutner, as the victim needed to be, quote, someone Morgan loved. Their plan was mostly discussed on bus rides to and from school, and occasionally over email. Over time, they created a code that they would use to discuss elements of the plan. The words deed or it meant killing, the word cracker meant knife, and camping trip or our secret trip to Pennsylvania meant the Nicollet National Forest. From a Google search, they had determined that it was easiest to kill someone while they were sleeping, and they decided that Morgan would host a sleepover and Anissa would stab Bella in the neck while she slept with a knife that they obtained from Morgan's kitchen. The two were very aware that killing someone was illegal, and Morgan had even gone so far as to warn Anissa that if anyone found out, quote, they would go to prison or be electrocuted, though the death penalty had been abolished in Wisconsin in 1853. The pair decided that they needed an escape plan, and their mission was to head toward Nicollet National Forest in northern Wisconsin, where they believed that Slenderman lived. Since they were only 12, they knew they would not be able to drive there, and they would have to make the over 300-mile trip by foot. According to Google Maps, the trip from Morgan's condo would take about 100 to 103 hours by foot, and they anticipated that they would encounter other creepypasta characters on their trek, so they took notes on ways to ward them off. They believed that after the murder of Bella and their trek into the forest, they would eventually come upon Slender Mansion, and Slenderman would invite them to live with him and the other creepypastas as proxies for the rest of their lives. The sleepover would take place in May, in celebration of Morgan's 13th birthday. By the spring of 2014, both girls were starting to find issues with the logic of their plan. At one point, Anissa, who was secretly starting to believe that what they were planning was insane, but when she presented this to Morgan, she was told to abandon all logic because it didn't pertain to them anymore. At some point, they decided they were too far into planning and they needed to just go through with it, regardless of how they actually felt in the moment. 3 weeks before the sleepover was scheduled, Morgan emailed Anissa and told her to delete all of their conversations up to that point, and then she sent a follow-up email instructing her to delete all of her deleted message so they couldn't be found in the trash, and that she would explain more when they got to school the next day. But the sleepover itself took place on Friday, May 30th, 2014, and according to the parents of all of the girls, they were excited for the weekend. After school, Morgan and Anissa rode the bus home and stopped by the condo that Anissa shared with her father to pack her overnight bag. The girls searched the condo for things that Anissa would want to bring along to Slender Mansion as memories of her life before. She settled in on a few family photos, and then she left her LG cell phone with a goodbye note to her family in the phone's notes app for them to find after she had left. They then headed into Morgan's condo across the complex to await Bella's arrival and let the party begin. While they waited, they packed their getaway bag with supplies that they felt they would need on their trek to Slender Mansion. These included maxi pads, Hall's lozenges for Anissa, she could get hay fever, matches that Morgan had hidden in her closet and disguised with wrapping paper so that her parents would not open them, granola bars, 2 reusable water bottles, and 2 of Morgan's photo albums. Despite Bella and Anissa having a strained past, according to Bella and her parents, she had no reservations about being at the same sleepover as Anissa to celebrate Morgan's birthday. When the girls arrived to the party, Bella was actually caught by surprise when Anissa pulled her aside and actually apologized, quote, for all the times she had hit her in the past, unquote. The fact that Anissa was taking responsibility for her actions was a big sign of growth for Bella, and it made her wonder if she wasn't so bad after all. The girls had a packed night. The party began at the local roller skating rink, Skateland, and then the girls came home, tired, and watched Morgan open her birthday presents. Anissa had given her a Star Trek mug, Bella gave her a stuffed banana, a Nerf gun, and gummy bear printed duct tape. Before they went to bed, the 3 girls crowded around the Geiser family's computer and played The Sims, and after a while, Bella was starting to feel a little bit left out and kind of annoyed, so she decided to go upstairs and go to bed early. She climbed up into Morgan's twin-size loft bed and fell asleep facing away from the window. Anissa and Morgan had planned to put duct tape over Bella's mouth and stab her as soon as she fell asleep. However, both girls agreed that they were too tired to kill anyone after their trip to Skateland. They needed to rest first, so Morgan set an alarm on her Kindle for 2 a.m. At that point, she would wake up Anissa and they would follow through with their plan. Hopefully, by then, Bella would be sound asleep and their plan would go off without a hitch. The 2 girls remained awake and restless at 1:30 a.m., while Bella remained fast asleep. Morgan convinced Anissa to go back to sleep, promising that she would wake her up with the alarm when it went off at 2 a.m., but eventually she ended up deleting the alarm, hoping that if they just didn't wake up, they wouldn't have to go through with the plan. Eventually, Anissa woke up around 5:30 a.m., and when she realized that Morgan had never woken her up over 3 hours ago when the alarm was supposed to go off, she was furious. She woke Morgan and asked, why can't we just do it now? But by then, they had a better idea, to go down to the computer in the basement and take quizzes on quotive.com instead. The pair would often take quizzes like, are you really best friends? Or does my best friend like me? But Bella eventually woke up in Morgan's room alone, and she was frustrated. She felt like she wasn't having any fun and contemplated going home, especially when she discovered both Morgan and Anissa with their faces glued to the computer screen together. When she heard Bella approach, Anissa asked her a question, pretending it was from the website. She asked, what would you do if someone were to come up and stab you? And Bella responded that she would probably scream. The girls ate breakfast together. Morgan's mom, Angie, had set out strawberries and homemade donuts, and the girls played dress-up and eventually asked if they could go to David's Park, which was a nearby public park. After deliberating, Morgan's parents thought it would be okay, as long as they stayed together as a group. They were celebrating Morgan's birthday, after all. It was a special occasion. And unbeknownst to Angie, Anissa had asked Morgan if they could go to the park and do the, quote, deed that they were unable to do the night before. At 9:30 a.m., Morgan took a knife with a 6-inch blade from her kitchen and put on her winter coat, even though it was 75 degrees outside. She grabbed the getaway bag and headed to the park with her friends. According to reports, when they first arrived to the park, the girls played on the equipment as normal for a while before trying to begin their plan to murder Bella. The girls decided that they would kill Bella in the park's public restroom. Anissa explained later to the police that they chose the bathroom because there was a drain for the blood to go down, but they had planned to pose Bella's body on the toilet in one of the stalls so that the blood could go down the toilet and it would just look like one of the other stalls was occupied. They felt that this would give them a good head start to get to Slender Mansion before anyone could catch up with them. Ultimately, this is not what happened, and their plan really did not go very smoothly at all. While at the park, Anissa and Morgan were getting kind of jumpy. At one point, Anissa asked to talk to Morgan alone and kind of snapped at Bella. Morgan eventually got Bella to follow them in the bathroom by claiming that there was some cool vandalism on the wall that she wanted to show her, but then admitted to lying about the vandalism once they had Bella cornered in a stall. Morgan and Anissa ordered Bella to, quote, go to sleep on the floor of the bathroom, but Bella told them that she wasn't tired and she was confused by what kind of game they were playing. If anything, she was starting to get annoyed. Morgan and Anissa argued with one another in the bathroom, both feeling nervous about going through with their plan. They both wanted the other to be the one who did the stabbing. And eventually, Morgan asked Anissa if she could knock Bella out, thinking that it would make it easier to go through with the plan. Anissa agreed and, quote, punched Bella in the forehead, but in reality, it was more of a hard push than a punch. As a result, Bella remained conscious, and now she was angry. She eventually got back up and just went back out on the playground to play, leaving Morgan and Anissa behind in the bathroom, and they plotted their next move in hushed tones. When they eventually emerged, they suggested to Bella that the three of them go on a walk down Big Bend Road, which was nearby, and Bella led the way without any complaint. To her, this seemed like a very valid suggestion that wasn't out of the ordinary. In the distance, there was a sign with a big red X that marked where Big Bend Road comes to a dead end. When they arrived at the sign, Anissa suggested that the three of them play hide and seek, which was a ploy. They were hoping that this would lure Bella into the woods, where the two of them could sneak up on her and attack her when she wouldn't expect it. According to police reports, the girls played one round of hide and seek, quote, the normal way, before leaning into their plan. After the first round, when Morgan went off to, quote, count, Anissa led Bella to a clearing in the woods where she instructed her to lie down, hoping it would make the stabbing easier. Bella did not want to cooperate, and she didn't want to, quote, lie on the dirty ground. Frustrated, Anissa pushed Bella down and then sat on top of her. Bella screamed and tried to push Anissa off, but Anissa continued to hold her down. However, as she continued to scream, Anissa felt overwhelmed, at one point telling the police, quote, screaming is the one thing I can't handle. So she let her go, and Bella went off to pick some flowers. Anissa saw Morgan watching them and realized that she looked, quote, freaked out, and went over to her. Morgan tried to give Anissa the knife, hoping that she would just take over, but she refused. Eventually, Anissa convinced Morgan to do the stabbing, telling her, quote, go ballistic. Eventually, Morgan pounced on Bella, straddling her in the dirt, and she stabbed her 19 times in the torso and legs. As she stabbed, she said, I'm sorry, I have to do this because it's the only way to save my life. Someone from creepypasta is stalking me. It turned out that neither Anissa nor Morgan really knew what it would entail to kill someone. The only reference they really had for death is what they saw in video games, and they were not expecting there to be so much blood. They led Bella deeper into the woods, and at one point Anissa told her to lie down because she would lose blood less quickly, because Bella kept getting up and trying to fight back. Bella's largest wound was on her leg, and at one point they tried to clean it with a large leaf. Anissa and Morgan told Bella they were leaving to go get help, but that was a lie. Feeling satisfied that they were leaving Bella to die, they hiked back to Big Bend Road and began walking in the direction that they believed they would find Slender Mansion. Anissa and Morgan first stopped by a nearby stream to clean themselves of Bella's blood, and Anissa was successful, but Morgan, who had been the one to do the stabbing, was covered in it. and they knew they needed to be able to find a bathroom to get all of it off. So they headed in the direction of a nearby Walmart. On the way, they came past a campsite and stole some bug spray. Wisconsin in the late spring and early summer can be relatively hot and humid, and the bugs were out, so they knew they would need it to get through their long trek to Nicollet National Forest. When they made it to Walmart, they were afraid that they would be recognized or spotted, but then deduced that there were plenty of people there and it was worth the risk. The pair cleaned up in the bathroom of the Walmart and made a lap around the store without being stopped or questioned. From Walmart, they headed toward Fox River, which goes through downtown Waukesha. They knew that the water flowed north and knew that they needed to go north to find Slenderman in Nicollet National Forest, so they followed the flow of the river. When they passed a pub called the Wonderland Tap, they filled up their reusable water bottles and ate a snack while Morgan flipped through her photo albums and cried for what Anissa felt like was about 30 minutes. They eventually passed a family-owned and operated furniture store called Steinhoffel's that had a table with lemonade and cookies for guests to take. The girls took 4 cookies and a few packages of fruit snacks for fuel and then kept walking. Eventually, they made it to the Welcome to Waukesha sign on the north end of town, which meant that they were nearly at the neighboring town of Pewaukee, but a busy interstate highway blocked their path. They went about 3 miles out of their way trying to circumvent the highway, but then felt hot and stopped to rest at a nearby cemetery. At this point, 5 hours had passed since the stabbing. Luckily for Bella, there had been a charity 5K happening at the paved trails along Fox River in the morning that she was attacked. Luckily for Bella, it wouldn't take 5 hours for her to be found after the stabbing. And also luckily for Bella, there was a charity 5K happening at the paved trails along Fox River the morning that she was attacked. At 9:53 a.m., a bicyclist named Greg Steinberg, who was returning home from the race, came upon her and called the police. Bella had managed to drag herself, bleeding heavily, out of the forest, closer to Big Bend Road where she could find help. Miraculously, she was still conscious, but just barely. She was able to tell him that she was a 12-year-old girl and that she had been stabbed. Steinberg assumed that whoever had attacked Bella had gotten away with a car. She hadn't been able to explain to him that it was actually 2 girls her own age who had committed the stabbing, one of whom she had considered to be her best friend until she drew out her knife. Paramedics were able to get Bella to the hospital, and police could ask her a few questions before she headed into surgery. Because she was so weak, she could really only answer yes or no, but she was able to give police enough information to begin looking for their suspects. They had asked if she had been stabbed. Yes. Had she been pushed into the woods? Yes. Was there another girl there? Yes. The police thought that the other girl would be a potential victim, but in reality, the girls Bella referenced were actually her friends who committed the crime. By the time police caught up with Anissa and Morgan, hours after the stabbing, they had hiked over 10 miles. They were exhausted and lost. They had prayed to Slenderman that he would help them find their way, but he never came. They were alone. Police found them in a ditch, covered in dirt and blood, and officers stated that when they came upon them, they appeared, quote, just like normal girls. But once they got Morgan in handcuffs, she stated, "I was forced to kill my best friend." Anissa and Morgan were brought to the Milwaukee police station and placed into separate interview rooms for questioning. They were read their Miranda rights, their clothes taken for evidence, and traded for a pair of jailhouse scrubs to change into. Their parents were called, and they also arrived to the police station, but they were not told until their statements were taken that the girls had been placed under arrest, that the girls were actually the perpetrators of the stabbing, rather than just witnesses. The Milwaukee Police Department was not used to handling cases that were this violent, especially violent cases that were committed by perpetrators as young as Anissa and Morgan. In the state of Wisconsin, homicide and attempted homicide are immediately tried in adult court, regardless of the age of the offenders. Anissa and Morgan were in serious trouble. Additionally, in the state of Wisconsin, it is legal for police to interrogate children without first offering them a phone call, and it is also legal for them to interrogate a child without a parent or advocate present, unless the child specifically asks for an attorney, something that neither Anissa nor Morgan did. Both girls did admit to detectives their roles in the crime. They asked about how Bella was doing, and both showed relief to learn that she was going to survive. Anissa was interested in knowing how far she and Morgan had hiked after the stabbing, claiming that she was interested because, quote, she is not usually very athletic. Morgan's interrogation was less direct than Anissa's, partially due to her undiagnosed schizophrenia. But throughout the course of both girls' interviews, they described to detectives that they had planned to kill Bella to become proxies for Slenderman, a demonic figure that they believed was real. At the end of their interrogation, the girls were transported to the Washington County Jail to await whatever happened next. One of the biggest issues in the fact that Anissa and Morgan's case would be tried in adult court was the lack of mental health resources that would be available to the girls as they awaited the trial in their case. In the state of Wisconsin, if a juvenile is arrested for a crime that is tried through the juvenile justice system, the offender will receive therapy, schooling, and other services leading up to their trial. However, if the offender is going through the adult system, regardless of their age or mental state, all of these services go out the window, even if they are desperately needed. From the amount of shared delusion between Anissa and Morgan, it was very apparent to both their parents and attorneys in the case that the girls really needed support for their mental health during their incarceration, especially since it was likely that it would be years before the girls set foot in a courtroom for a trial, if there were to be a trial. But Morgan, who had now gone through a significant trauma, was going into an episode of psychosis, which would ultimately lead to her schizophrenia diagnosis. In order to make it to trial, she was in dire need of mental health services, which would be an uphill battle to achieve. Due to the nature of her case being tried in adult court, it was not until late 2015 that Morgan would finally receive adequate medical treatment for her schizophrenia while incarcerated. Attorneys in defense of Anissa and Morgan would make many failed attempts to move both girls' cases into juvenile court. Eventually, both girls would accept plea deals for their charges and receive NGRI verdicts. NGRI meaning not guilty due to reason of insanity. And while this means that legally they were not held responsible for their crime and could not be held to a criminal sentence, the girls were both sentenced to serve time in treatment at a mental health institution. The specific facility is the Winnebago Mental Health Institute in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Anissa was sentenced to 25 years and Morgan to 40 years at Winnebago. And despite the length of their sentences given to them by the judge, it is not a criminal sentence. The 25 and 40 years, respectively, is the maximum amount that either girl will be allowed to stay at Winnebago, and every 6 months, the girls can petition for their release from treatment. Anissa was ultimately released in July of 2021, while Morgan remains there in treatment. However, she just submitted a new petition for release earlier this month, and it is unknown whether or not the judge will accept that petition for release. In cases like the Slenderman attempted murder, there really are no winners. 3 families in a seemingly safe community are now left in shambles simply because of a story that 2 young girls took at face value and blew beyond rational proportion. While we can remain grateful that Bella Leutner was able to survive the attack, graduate from high school, go off to college, and lead a relatively normal life, she also has to live that life covered with scars that will always haunt her. As for Anissa and Morgan, while they leave the case without criminal records, their lives will always be plagued by the consequences of their actions. Their socialization with their peers will be forever stunted, and the lives of their families forever changed, all from a scary story that went too far and became their reality. If you'd like to learn more about this case, I would recommend reading Slenderman, Online Obsession, Mental Illness, and the Violent Crime of 2 Midwestern Girls by Kathleen Hale, which was published in 2002. I checked out a copy from my local library, and it's an excellent resource in not only the discussion of this case, but also in the discussion of prioritizing youth mental health. Additionally, I found the documentary Beware the Slenderman, which was released in 2019 and is available for streaming on Max, to be beneficial in writing this episode. It really analyzes the internet safety side of this case and goes into great detail on the background of creepypastas and how susceptible our minds can be to what we see online. As always, thank you to Chris Mitchell for editing today's episode, and thank you to all of you who are listening. This episode is coming out just in time for Halloween, and we hope that you have a fun and safe holiday. Until next time, stay safe, and we will see you again soon at the precinct.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.